My dad didn't just slap me. He did it in front of everyone buying his perfect father act. I walked out with a burning cheek and one thought: I am done being silent. By midnight, a stranger in a diner said 5 words that changed everything. Your mother left you proof. 2 weeks later, a judge took away what my father loved most. Not me. Control. My name is Harper Campbell. I am 29 years old, and for exactly 29 years, I believed that survival meant staying quiet. But tonight, the carefully constructed illusion of my family shattered under the blinding glare of crystal chandeliers. It was supposed to be a grand celebration of my father, Gordon Campbell, turning 57. Our sprawling estate was packed wall to wall with local politicians, wealthy real estate developers, and neighbors who worshipped the very ground he walked on. It was billed as a high society fundraising gala, beautifully masked as an intimate birthday party. There were floating trays of expensive champagne, the incessant clinking of imported crystal glassware, and the rich, booming sound of my father's practiced laughter echoing through the grand foyer. He was playing the perfect patriarch, a role he had perfected over decades. And then, without warning, came the slap. The sound cracked through the expansive room like a gunshot, instantly silencing the classical string quartet playing in the corner. He did it right in front of the massive marble fireplace, standing tall so everyone could witness his absolute authority. The public excuse he gave the stunned, breathless crowd was as sharp and calculated as his heavy hand. He had violently torn open the elegant wrapping of my gift, scoffed loudly at the customized, leather-bound planner inside, and tossed it onto the polished hardwood floor like it was pure garbage. He called it cheap. His voice boomed, dripping with theatrical disappointment. He called me an ungrateful, useless daughter who never appreciated the massive empire he had built from nothing to provide for us. He performed his outrage brilliantly, making the guests pity him for having such a massive disappointment of a child. But as the fiery sting radiated across my jaw and the metallic taste of fear filled my mouth, I looked directly into his cold, unblinking eyes and knew the absolute truth. The gift was merely a convenient prop. His sudden, explosive rage was entirely real, but it had absolutely nothing to do with a leather planner. In the deafening, suffocating silence that followed the strike, my eyes instinctively darted to the right. A woman in a shimmering, sequined dress had her smartphone raised high above the crowd. The tiny red recording light was glaring brightly. She had been filming the birthday toast moments before, but she had caught the assault instead. Gordon had not noticed the lens pointed at him, blinded by his own arrogance and fury. But I did, my father, the meticulous and ruthless architect of his own flawless public image, had just slipped up, and someone in that room had the undeniable proof. I did not cry. I refused to give him that sick satisfaction. I did not yell or try to defend myself against his false public accusations. I simply turned on my heel and walked straight out of the towering double mahogany doors. Once outside the immediate gaze of the crowd, my body betrayed me. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely grip the heavy brass railing of the staircase. I rushed upstairs to my bedroom just long enough to grab my worn canvas tote bag, a tangled phone charger, and a thick, sealed folder of financial papers I had kept hidden at the absolute bottom of my closet for over a year. I had never dared to open those papers. I was too afraid of what I might find. Until tonight. I was standing on the freezing pavement outside the gated estate, struggling to pull the crisp Ohio air into my tight lungs, when my phone vibrated aggressively in my wool coat pocket. The screen lit up the darkness with a text message from an entirely unknown number. The words were stark, brief, and terrifying. Do not go back. They are about to erase the traces. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded my veins. I threw myself into my car and drove aimlessly into the night. I drove for 45 minutes, putting as much distance between myself and my father's kingdom as possible, until I found a brightly lit, 24/7 diner on the desolate, industrial outskirts of Columbus, Ohio. The flickering neon sign buzzed loudly overhead, casting a sickly yellow light over the empty, cracked asphalt of the parking lot. I walked inside, the bell above the door chiming weakly. The air smelled of stale grease and burnt sugar. I slid into a torn vinyl booth at the very back, hiding myself in the deep shadows, and ordered a cup of their absolute cheapest black coffee from a tired waitress. When she walked away, I did not touch the steaming mug. Instead, I picked up a scratched stainless steel spoon from the table and stared intently at my distorted reflection in the curved metal. A harsh, dark red welt was already blossoming angrily across my left cheek, a physical brand of his twisted control. The diner doorbell chimed again. Footsteps approached my booth, slow, heavy, and deliberate. A woman slid into the seat directly across from me. I had never seen her before in my entire life. She wore a perfectly tailored charcoal blazer that looked entirely out of place amidst the sticky syrup dispensers and cheap laminated menus of the diner. She did not ask if the seat was taken. She simply folded her manicured hands firmly on the sticky formica table and studied me. Her name, I would soon learn, was Marion Voss. She was a civil and probate attorney, and her voice possessed a chilling, absolute calm that immediately sucked the frantic energy out of the space around her. She was a woman who dealt in hard facts, not messy emotions. She did not offer fake pleasantries. She did not look at my bruised face with pity or ask if I needed ice. Instead, Marion reached into her structured leather briefcase and pulled out a worn, heavy manila envelope. She placed it squarely in the center of the table. Exactly between my untouched coffee cup and the metal napkin dispenser, my breath caught in my throat. Written across the front of the aged envelope, in elegant, hauntingly familiar cursive handwriting, was a single name, Evelyn Campbell, my mother. She had been dead for over 10 years. Marion looked me dead in the eye, her gaze piercing through my shock, and delivered 5 simple words that would completely rewrite my entire existence and eventually burn my father's world to the ground. Your mother left you proof. I stared down at the envelope, the ambient noise of the diner kitchen fading into a dull, distant roar. The secret folder I had frantically brought from the house felt heavy inside my tote bag resting by my feet, but the thin paper envelope on the table felt like a live explosive waiting to detonate. Marion stood up smoothly, buttoning her charcoal blazer with sharp, precise movements. She looked down at me one last time, her expression completely unreadable, and delivered a final, undeniable hook that I could not ignore. If you want to know the real reason your father struck you in front of half the city tonight, Marion said, her tone dropping to a quiet, dangerous whisper, you need to open that envelope right now, because by tomorrow morning, the Gordon Campbell you know will start hunting you. She turned and walked out into the cold Ohio night, leaving me entirely alone with the ghosts of my broken family, a burning cheek, and a terrifying truth I was finally ready to face. At 6 o'clock that morning, the frost was still clinging to the manicured blades of grass on the front lawn. I was already outside, shivering in a thin fleece jacket, arguing with the event rental company about the exact placement of 200 gold Chiavari chairs. Setting up for the Campbell Family Foundation annual gala was not just a simple chore list casually taped to the refrigerator door. It was a full-scale event production, and I was the unpaid, uncredited director. My father loved to stand at the edge of his sprawling driveway, gripping a steaming mug of black coffee, and wave at the passing neighbors. He would project his booming voice across the property, bragging about how he was personally overseeing every single detail to ensure the charity raised maximum funds for the community. The reality was vastly different. I was the one who haggled with the florists over the inflated price of white hydrangeas. I finalized the vendor contracts, coordinated the valet parking schedule, and personally scrubbed the patio stones when the power washer suddenly broke down. I had my own life, or at least the hollow shell of one. I worked 60 hours a week as a shift manager at Juniper and Ash Catering downtown. I spent my exhausting days organizing corporate luncheons and wrangling temperamental pastry chefs. But no matter how tired I was always violently pulled back into his orbit. There was an invisible, crushing weight that tethered me to that massive house, It was the heavy, suffocating debt of being a Campbell. That debt was constantly reinforced by the absolute golden child of the family. My younger sister, Blair, was exactly 26 years old and had never touched a dirty folding table in her entire life. She drifted onto the patio just past noon, holding an iced latte, her salon blowout completely flawless. She did not ask how she could help with the setup. She simply glided over to Gordon, holding a sleek, heavy velvet box containing an imported watch that cost more than my annual salary. My father immediately wrapped a thick arm around her shoulders, kissing her forehead and loudly declaring her the absolute light of his life to anyone within earshot. He was a master at building the impenetrable image of the perfect American patriarch. To the town council and the country club elite, Gordon Campbell was a generous, loving father who put his family above all else, but behind closed doors, his affection was strictly transactional. His favorite, most utilized weapon was a single phrase, delivered with a cold, hard stare whenever I stepped out of line. "Everything you have is because of me." It was a mantra specifically designed to keep us small and compliant. I remembered vividly the time my car transmission blew out 3 years ago. I was desperate and completely broke. Gordon swooped in, played the benevolent hero, and paid the mechanic bill in full, but he kept the itemized receipt. He framed it as a joke, pinning it to the corkboard in his home office. But it was not a joke. It was a tight leather leash. Every time I tried to skip a mandatory Sunday dinner or declined to run one of his endless errands, his eyes would flick toward that piece of paper. The message was always crystal clear. I owed him my existence, and he would collect the interest daily. By 8 o'clock that evening, the party was in full swing, and the suffocating pressure of his perfection was unbearable. I stood near the catering tent, nursing a glass of sparkling water, watching him expertly work the crowd. Gordon was holding court near the melting ice sculpture, swirling a glass of expensive bourbon. He was not talking about the charity or the children it supposedly helped. He was aggressively laying the groundwork for his own empire. I watched his mouth move as he charmed a group of local investors. He kept steering the conversation toward a massive commercial real estate acquisition he was pursuing. He needed capital, and he needed absolute investor confidence. He raised his glass, his voice carrying easily over the gentle string music, proudly proclaiming that the Campbell family was standing behind this new venture 100%. He smiled right at me when he said it, a chilling, dead-eyed smile that made my stomach physically drop. He was selling them a total lie, and he was using my silent obedience as his primary collateral. As I stood there, hiding in the shadows of the white canvas tent, the crushing realization washed over me. The tension in our house had been building for exactly 14 days. 2 weeks ago, Gordon had called me into his dark, wood-paneled study. He had casually tossed a thick stack of legal documents onto his mahogany desk. Pushing a heavy silver pen toward me, he told me it was just some routine foundation paperwork, a simple formality that required my signature as a board member. But I had finally learned to read the fine print of my father's generosity. I scanned the first page and saw the heavily bolded words, "personal guarantee and power of attorney." My heart had hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. For the first time in my entire life, I did not pick up the pen. I took a step back, looked at the sudden flash of pure, unadulterated panic masking as rage in his eyes, and told him I needed time to read it over properly. He had dismissed me with a vicious warning glare, but the air in the house had been entirely poisoned ever since. Staring at him across the crowded lawn, the scattered pieces of the puzzle aggressively snapped together. The public humiliation he had just subjected me to inside the living room had absolutely nothing to do with a cheap leather planner. It was never about the birthday gift. The slap was a highly calculated punishment. It was a brutal physical warning shot fired in front of an audience to break my will. He was punishing me because I had dared to disrupt his perfect timeline. I had dared to hesitate. I had dared to delay the signature he desperately needed to close his precious real estate deal. He did not hit me because he was disappointed in my gift. He hit me because he was losing his grip. Exactly 14 days before the chandelier lights caught the vicious arc of his hand, My father had summoned me to his private sanctuary. The home office was a formidable fortress of dark mahogany, heavy velvet drapes, and towering shelves lined with unread, leather-bound books, purchased entirely for aesthetics. The air inside that room always felt thick and stagnant, smelling faintly of expensive cigar smoke, sharp lemon furniture polish, and pure intimidation. I had just finished an agonizing 10-hour shift managing the chaotic catering kitchen downtown, and my feet ached terribly. But when Gordon Campbell sent a message demanding your presence, you did not dare make him wait. I found him sitting behind his massive, custom-built desk. His tailored suit jacket was draped casually over the back of his high leather chair. He looked deceptively relaxed, the very picture of a confident, successful businessman winding down his day. As I stepped onto the thick Persian rug, he slid a heavy, stapled stack of crisp white papers across the polished wood surface. The cover page bore a sleek, aggressively modern logo that I had never seen before, Crestline Development Group. He picked up his heavy gold fountain pen and tapped the metallic nib impatiently against the bottom signature line. "I just need a quick signature from you, Harper," he said. His tone was impossibly light, breezy even, as if he were asking me to pass the salt across the dinner table. "It is just some routine restructuring for the new portfolio we are putting together, a minor administrative formality, really. You are just acting as a nominal co-signer on this particular entity." I reached out and picked up the pen, the cool metal heavy in my fingers, but before I blindly pressed the ink to the paper, my eyes drifted down past the blank line and into the dense, single-spaced block of legal text above it. I had spent enough time parsing through vendor contracts and catering liability clauses to know exactly how to spot a trap hidden in plain sight. Buried deep within the third paragraph were two specific legal phrases that made the blood instantly drain from my face. Personal guarantee and power of attorney. I slowly lowered the gold pen, placing it gently back onto the desk. "Why does my name need to be on this?" I asked, fighting to keep my voice carefully neutral and devoid of the sudden panic rising in my chest. Gordon chuckled. It was a rich, warm sound that completely failed to reach the cold, calculating depths of his eyes. "Because you are my daughter," he replied smoothly, folding his hands together, "and because you owe me. Think of this as you finally stepping up and pulling your weight for this family's future." I shook my head, pushing the thick packet an inch back toward his side of the desk. "A personal guarantee means I am held entirely liable if this Crestline company defaults on whatever loans they are taking out. I do not even know what this company is, let alone who runs it or what it does. And giving you power of attorney over my finances." The fabricated warmth vanished from his face in a fraction of a second. The temperature in the room seemed to plummet. He leaned forward, bracing his heavy forearms on the edge of the mahogany desk. The mask of the genial, patient patriarch melted away entirely to reveal the ruthless, unyielding negotiator underneath. "You do not need to know the operational details," he said, his voice dropping to a harsh, grating whisper that vibrated with suppressed anger. "You just need to do exactly what I tell you to do and sign the document, unless, of course, you have absolutely zero interest in ever seeing a single thing that belonged to your mother." My breath hitched violently in my throat. He had used money to control me for years. He had used guilt and obligation, but he had never weaponized her before, not once, not like this. Before I could even begin to process the sheer, breathtaking cruelty of that specific threat, the heavy brass handle of the office door turned. The door swung open and Blair breezed into the room, bringing with her the overpowering scent of expensive floral perfume. She was completely oblivious to the suffocating, toxic tension hanging in the air, casually swinging a glossy designer shopping bag from her wrist. She stopped abruptly, glancing between the two of us with mild curiosity. "Am I interrupting a super-secret business meeting?" she asked, a playful pout forming on her lips. In the blink of an eye, Gordon transformed. His rigid posture instantly relaxed. The hard lines around his mouth dissolved into a broad, affectionate smile, and he waved her into the room with genuine warmth. "Not at all, sweetheart," he cooed, his voice dripping with paternal adoration and patience. "We are just helping your older sister become a bit more responsible with the family affairs. Just teaching her the ropes so she can finally understand how the real world works." Blair smiled, her eyes glazing over with clear boredom at the mere mention of legal paperwork. She turned on her heel, her designer heels clicking sharply on the hardwood border of the rug. "Okay, well, just do not keep her locked up in here too long," she hummed dismissively, pulling the heavy door shut behind her. The metallic click of the door latch falling into place was like a starting gun going off in my head. Adrenaline flooded my system. I reached out and grabbed the Crestline packet, pulling it firmly off the desk and pressing it against my chest. "I need to read this over properly," I said, my voice trembling slightly despite my desperate efforts to hold it steady. "I cannot sign a personal guarantee without understanding the terms. I will take it to my apartment tonight and bring it back tomorrow morning." Gordon lunged across the desk. His large, heavy hand clamped down violently on the thick stack of paper, his fingers digging into the pages. He forcefully yanked the document out of my grasp, the top corner tearing with a loud, sickening rip. He slammed the papers back onto his desk, leaning over the wood until his face was mere inches from mine. His breath was hot and aggressive against my skin. "You do not get to review what I decide," he spat, every word a venomous strike. "I built the ground you walk on. I own the roof over your head. If you do not sign this exactly when I tell you to, I will personally make sure you walk away from this family with absolutely nothing." He pointed a rigid finger toward the door, silently ordering me out of his sight. I backed out of the room, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, the threat echoing loudly in my ears. As I walked down the long, silent hallway, tracing the familiar patterns of the expensive wallpaper, the chaotic pieces of the puzzle began to arrange themselves into a terrifying new picture in my mind. He had not just threatened to cut me off financially, he had specifically and deliberately tied my compliance to my mother for an entire decade. I had foolishly believed her legacy was nothing more than a collection of faded photographs, old jewelry, and unresolved grief, but staring down at my empty, trembling hands, a cold, hard reality took shape. My mother was not just a nostalgic memory. She was a tangible asset. She was a locked secret, and my father was holding her hostage to force my hand. The cheap diner coffee sitting between us had gone completely cold. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sickly yellow hue over the sticky formica table. Marion Voss sat across from me, her posture impossibly rigid, waiting for me to process the heavy manila envelope she had just placed in front of me. "My instructions from your mother were incredibly specific," the attorney said, her voice cutting sharply through the ambient hum of the late-night diner kitchen. "I was formally retained by Evelyn over 10 years ago. I was legally bound to hold on to this file until one of two very strict conditions was met. You either had to leave that estate permanently on your own accord, or you had to show undeniable physical evidence of being threatened." Marion gestured slightly toward the angry, throbbing red mark swelling across my left cheek. The welt was all the proof she needed. My hands trembled violently as I reached out. The paper of the envelope was stiff and aged, smelling faintly of old ink and dry storage. I slid my index finger under the glued flap and tore it open. Inside the envelope were 3 distinct items. The first was a handwritten letter folded neatly on my mother's personal, embossed stationery. The second was a thick, legally bound document heavily stapled at the corner, titled Trust Summary. The third was a small, faded yellow sticky note pressed firmly onto the very first page of that summary packet. I read the sticky note first. My mother's elegant, sloping handwriting was unmistakable. It hit my chest like a physical blow. The note contained a single, chilling directive: if anything feels forced, check the trust bank statements. I pushed the yellow note aside and flipped frantically through the heavy legal summary. My eyes scanned the dense, single-spaced paragraphs until they landed on a heavily bolded section outlining the creation of the Evelyn Campbell Trust. I had never heard of this entity in my entire life. According to the legally binding document, my mother had quietly transferred the vast majority of her inherited family wealth and personal liquid assets into this entirely separate, legally protected structure just months before she passed away. The terms laid out on the paper were painfully clear. The absolute primary beneficiary of the trust was me. I was to inherit the entire estate, free and clear of any external control. On the exact day I turned 30 years old, I am 29. My 30th birthday is exactly 11 months away. I read the next line on the page, and the air completely left my lungs. The sole executor and current managing trustee, the person holding absolute, unchecked control over those massive assets until my 30th birthday, was Gordon Campbell. A sudden, blinding wave of clarity washed over me, so intense it made me dizzy. The frantic panic flashing in his eyes 2 weeks ago in his dark study. The desperate, aggressive rush to force me to sign that massive stack of papers. The sudden, violent rage tonight in front of his wealthy donors. It was never about teaching me financial responsibility. It was never about a cheap leather planner. He was running out of time. In less than 1 year, Gordon would legally lose his iron grip on the fortune that was secretly holding his entire fabricated empire together. "Look at the appendix," Marion instructed quietly. She pulled a separate, thinner file folder from her structured leather briefcase and slid it across the table. "These are the most recent, certified banking statements for the trust account. I have been monitoring them quietly as part of my fiduciary duty as the secondary oversight officer named in the original trust draft." She pointed a perfectly manicured finger at a long series of massive wire transfers. They were bleeding out of the primary trust account on a regular, monthly basis. Hundreds of thousands of dollars were being systematically drained and routed to a single, external operating account. The receiving entity listed on the bank ledger was Crestline Development Group. It was the exact same phantom company from the personal guarantee documents he had tried to force onto me 2 weeks ago. "He is illegally siphoning the trust to fund his own commercial real estate ventures," Marion said flatly, stating the criminal act as if she were reading a grocery list, but to secure the final, massive institutional loans he desperately needs to finish his Crestline project. The corporate banks require a personal guarantor, since the trust technically owns the collateral he is illegally leveraging, and you are the primary beneficiary about to age into absolute control. The bank needs your signature to legally bind you to his massive debt. My mind raced back to the frantic moment in my bedroom earlier tonight. I reached down into my worn canvas tote bag, resting against my boots. My fingers brushed against the thick, sealed folder I had kept hidden at the absolute bottom of my closet for months. I pulled it out and slapped it onto the diner table next to my mother's letters. "I found this sitting in the output tray of his private office printer 6 months ago," I told her, my voice trembling but growing louder. I snatched it before he walked into the room. I was too terrified to ask him about it, and I was too paralyzed by fear to throw it away. I opened the folder. It was a single, heavily photocopied page of a legal document titled Loan Addendum. I slid it over the sticky table to Marion. At the very bottom of the page, resting heavily on the designated guarantor line, was the name Harper Campbell. But it was not my handwriting. The loops on the letters were entirely wrong. The pen pressure was too heavy and deliberate. It was a flawless, meticulously practiced forgery. Marion stared down at the forged signature for a long, silent moment. The diner around us seemed to hold its breath when she finally looked back up at me. The clinical, detached professionalism in her eyes had been entirely replaced by the sharp, predatory gleam of a seasoned litigator preparing for war. "This changes everything," Marion said, tapping her fingernail against the forged ink. "If we can prove he forged your signature to illegally encumber protected trust assets, and if we can prove he is actively committing severe fiduciary abuse to fund his private shell company, a civil court judge will not just slap his wrist, they will issue an immediate, emergency injunction. We can legally freeze every single asset he controls, lock him out of the trust completely, and sever his financial throat before he even realizes he is bleeding. She gathered the loose papers, neatly aligning the edges with precise, sharp taps against the table, and slid them back into the aged manila envelope. "You have a very stark choice to make right now." "Harper," Marion said, leaning back into the worn vinyl booth and crossing her arms, "you can get back in your car. Drive back to that sprawling estate, apologize for embarrassing him in front of his friends, and spend the rest of your natural life paying off his fraudulent debts." She slid a sleek, heavily embossed business card across the table. It stopped right next to my cold coffee cup. "Or," Marion said, her voice dropping to a low, commanding register, "you can decide to go all the way. We file the emergency petition tomorrow morning, take this straight to a judge, and you use the law to rip your life back." The next morning felt entirely disconnected from reality. By 8 o'clock, Marion Voss was driving me downtown in her immaculate black sedan. The city of Columbus was waking up, people rushing to their mundane office jobs, completely unaware of the invisible war I had just enlisted in. We pulled up to a towering glass and steel building, taking the private elevator up to the wealth management floor of a major institutional bank. We were there to meet Caleb Trent. I expected a slick, aggressive Wall Street type, but Caleb was a quiet, meticulous man wearing a soft beige cardigan and wire-rimmed glasses. He was the senior fiduciary officer assigned to oversee the administrative compliance of my mother's trust. He ushered us into a soundproof conference room, offering me a bottle of sparkling water that I nervously declined. Caleb did not speak in dense, suffocating legal jargon. He spoke like a mechanic explaining a car engine. "A trust is essentially a locked steel vault," Caleb explained, resting his hands on a thick manila file. "Your mother built the vault and put her assets inside. She handed the only key to your father, designating him as the trustee. His sole legal job is to guard the vault and ensure the contents are preserved for you. The primary beneficiary, on the exact day you turn 30 years old, the locks automatically break, the vault, and everything inside it, becomes yours, unless, of course, there is a valid legal amendment altering those original terms." I nodded slowly, gripping the edge of the glass table. "And my birthday is less than a year away." Caleb adjusted his glasses, his expression turning grim. He opened his file and extracted a single sheet of heavy bond paper. "Which is why this crossed my desk late yesterday afternoon. It was submitted directly by Gordon's private legal counsel." He slid the paper across the polished glass. It was titled, "Declaration of Trust Amendment." I scanned the heavy black text, my eyes locking onto a specific paragraph near the center. It stated that due to my alleged financial instability and lack of business acumen, the trustee powers granted to Gordon Campbell were being formally extended for an additional 10 years. He would retain absolute control over the vault until I turned 40, at the very bottom of the page, resting squarely on the beneficiary consent line, was my name, Harper Campbell. It was the exact same heavy, deliberate, perfectly simulated handwriting I had seen on the loan addendum hidden in my closet. "I did not sign this," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, yet it rang like a bell in the quiet room. "I have never seen this paper in my life. He forged it. Again." Marion did not gasp or show any surprise. She simply leaned forward, her eyes locked onto Caleb. "He is trying to buy himself another decade to drain the accounts for his Crestline Shell Company before she can legally open the books and see the missing funds. Caleb, if this amendment processes, he has unchecked authority." "I will flag it as disputed internally," Caleb replied immediately, pulling the paper back. "But a bank cannot play judge to permanently stop his access. You need a court order, a hard legal freeze." Marion turned to me, her strategic mind already moving 10 steps ahead. "We are pivoting immediately. We are drafting an ex parte emergency petition to protect the trust assets. But to convince a judge to freeze a multi-million-dollar estate without giving Gordon a chance to defend himself in the room, we need an airtight foundation of evidence, and I need you completely insulated. I left the bank with a terrifying, absolute clarity. I had to build a fortress around myself before my father realized I was fighting back. I spent the next 4 hours sitting in a crowded, noisy coffee shop, treating my survival like a corporate event checklist. First, I executed a hard freeze on my credit. I called Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion, verbally locking down my social security number so Gordon could not secretly open any more fraudulent lines of credit in my name. Next, I bought a new, cheap prepaid smartphone with cash and created a secure, encrypted email address. I changed the passwords to my personal banking, my car insurance, and my medical portals. I systematically severed every digital string he could possibly pull to track or control me. The third task was the hardest. I opened a private social media browser and tracked down the woman in the shimmering sequin dress from the party. I sent her a direct message, explaining simply that I needed the video for a private legal matter and begging for her discretion. 2 agonizing hours later, a secure download link appeared in my inbox. I downloaded the high-definition video file directly to a brand-new flash drive. Watching the footage on my small screen, hearing the sickening crack of his hand against my face, made my stomach violently rebel, but I forced myself to save it securely. It was no longer my trauma, it was my weapon. Before the sun went down, I walked into a sterile, brightly lit urgent care clinic 2 towns over. I sat on a crinkly paper-covered examination table and let a weary physician document the massive, dark purple contusion spreading across my cheekbone. She measured it with a small plastic ruler, took high-resolution clinical photographs, and typed up an official medical report citing blunt force trauma. I needed that clinical documentation to file a temporary protection order. Gordon could easily dismiss a daughter's tears, but he could not dismiss a licensed medical professional's certified evaluation. By late afternoon, I was sitting in Marion's private downtown office. The wood-paneled walls were lined with thick legal volumes. Her desk phone rang. She put it on speaker. It was Caleb calling from the bank. I finished the preliminary audit on the recent ledger activity. Caleb's voice echoed through the speaker. 2 days ago, Gordon requested a massive cash advance directly from the trust's liquid reserves. He withdrew exactly $75,000. What was the stated justification? Marion asked, typing rapidly on her laptop. The withdrawal slip cited educational advancement and living stabilization for the primary beneficiary. Caleb read strictly from the file. A hollow, bitter laugh escaped my throat. I work 60 hours a week managing a catering kitchen. I pay my own rent for a tiny 1-bedroom apartment. I have not been enrolled in any kind of school for over 7 years. I never saw a single cent of that money. He used your name to justify the withdrawal, and then funneled the cash straight into Crestline, Marion summarized, ending the call. She looked across the desk at me, the thick stack of our freshly printed emergency petition resting between us. 2 weeks, Marion said, her voice a sharp, steady anchor in the chaos. That is the timeline. 2 weeks is enough time to corner him, if we file the exact right thing. In the correct court, with the absolute right proof, we file tomorrow morning. Are you entirely ready for this? Harper. I looked at the legal documents, then out the window at the fading Ohio sunlight. My father had spent his entire life building a monument to his own ego, using my silent obedience as the mortar. I am ready, I said, my voice steady and completely devoid of fear. But I want to be perfectly clear about my intentions. Marion, I am not doing this out of spite. I am not doing this to ruin him. I am doing this to stop him. The whiteboard in Marion's office became our war room. Across the smooth white surface, she drew a banky, black timeline spanning exactly 14 days. It was a tactical, ruthless countdown to my father's absolute ruin. Day 1 was the emergency petition. Day 3 was the ex parte hearing to secure a temporary asset freeze. Day 7 was the formal demand for a comprehensive forensic accounting of the estate. Day 14 was the final strike, the permanent and total removal of the trustee. My job was to arm her. I became a ghost in my own life. operating entirely out of a sterile hotel room Marion had booked under a secure corporate alias. I laid out my digital arsenal on the cheap laminate desk. The high-definition video of the assault sat securely on a silver flash drive. Beside it lay printed screenshots of his threatening text messages, the heavily photocopied loan addendum from my closet, and the thick stack of trust bank statements Caleb had provided. It was a mountain of paper, but Marion needed it forged into a lethal weapon. Within 24 hours, Marion hired Dr. Lila Marsh, a private forensic document examiner with a fierce reputation for destroying fraudulent contracts in federal court. Dr. Marsh did not need a week to find the truth. She placed the trust amendment under a high-powered digital microscope and pointed a sharp stylus at the ink. She noted the unnatural hesitations, the incorrect slant of the loops, and the heavy, dragging pen pressure that completely lacked my natural fluidity. It was a meticulous, desperate forgery. The expert signed a sworn affidavit right there in the office, legally branding the document as a simulated fraud. The financial puzzle pieces snapped together with terrifying precision when Caleb sent over the complete 10-year transaction history of the trust. I sat on the hotel bed with a yellow highlighter, cross-referencing the massive outbound wire transfers with my father's public social media timeline. The correlation was sickening. On the exact day he transferred $450,000 into his Crestline Shell Company, he had posted a smiling photo announcing a groundbreaking ceremony for a new luxury condominium complex. When he siphoned out another $200,000 6 months later, it perfectly matched the week he bragged to the local business journal about acquiring a prime commercial lot. He was treating my mother's legacy like his own personal cash machine, funding his towering ego with stolen money. But paper trails and forged signatures were only part of the battle. We needed a human voice to corroborate his pattern of financial manipulation. I scrolled through the guest list from the birthday party and stopped on the name of a retired project accountant who had worked closely with the charity foundation for years. I called him from my untraceable prepaid phone. He was hesitant, his voice tight with anxiety, but the memory of the violent slap in the living room had clearly shaken his loyalty. He confessed, strictly off the record, but willing to be subpoenaed, that Gordon routinely borrowed the foundation's pristine name to secure lower interest rates for his private ventures, using the charity as a smokescreen to plug massive financial holes in his failing projects. The walls were rapidly closing in on Gordon, but he was a master of narrative control. My burner phone buzzed violently on the desk. It was Blair. I had not spoken to my younger sister since I walked out the front doors. I answered, and her voice immediately cracked with a mixture of raw panic and misplaced anger. She accused me of betraying the family. She screamed that our father was pacing the house, telling everyone that I had suffered a mental breakdown, violently broken into his private office, and stolen highly sensitive corporate documents to sell to his competitors. He was not just denying his own crimes, he was actively framing me as a corporate thief to completely discredit my credibility before I could strike. He was spinning a reverse narrative, playing the heartbroken, victimized father to absolute perfection. My blood boiled. I wanted to scream the truth at her, to send her the bank statements and the forged signature, to completely shatter her fragile, pampered reality. I opened my mouth to fight back, but Marion reached across the table and pressed her hand firmly over my phone, shaking her head sharply. I swallowed my rage and hung up the phone without saying a single word. Marion looked at me with cold, uncompromising intensity. "We do not engage with him or anyone under his control," she instructed strictly. "We do not defend ourselves to people committed to misunderstanding you. From this exact second forward, we speak exclusively through court summons, subpoenas, and sworn legal affidavits. Let him build his little house of cards on public sympathy. We are going to blow it down with hard evidence, as if the universe was rewarding my silence." Marion opened a heavy, leather-bound archival box she had requested from the original estate attorney's storage facility. She was searching for the foundational drafting notes of the trust. Deep at the bottom, buried under years of forgotten administrative filings, she unearthed a sealed, notarized letter of intent written entirely in my mother's hand. It was a hidden failsafe, designed specifically for the nightmare I was currently living. Marion read the delicate cursive out loud. Evelyn had explicitly stipulated that if the acting trustee ever engaged in any form of physical, emotional, or financial coercion to force the beneficiary into signing legally binding agreements, it constituted an immediate, irrevocable breach of fiduciary duty. The penalty was not a warning. The penalty was automatic, immediate removal from power. My mother had known, even a decade ago. As she was losing her battle with illness, she had clearly seen the darkness growing inside her husband. She had meticulously built a legal guillotine, hid it in the paperwork, and patiently waited for me to be strong enough to pull the lever. That night, I stood in the harsh, fluorescent light of the cheap hotel bathroom. I gripped the edges of the porcelain sink and stared at my reflection in the smudged mirror. The dark, angry red welt on my left cheek had faded into a dull, sickly yellow and green bruise. It was healing. For 29 years, I had looked in the mirror and seen a hostage. I had seen a silent, obedient girl who allowed herself to be crushed under the weight of an impossible debt. I saw the daughter who endured because she believed she had no other choice. But the woman staring back at me now was entirely different. Her eyes were hard, her jaw was set, and her spine was forged from steel. I reached up and gently touched the fading bruise, feeling absolutely no pain, only a cold, sharp anticipation. I was no longer his property, I was his reckoning. The video of the birthday gala somehow found its way onto the local neighborhood apps. I did not leak the footage, but the internet possesses its own ruthless, uncontrollable momentum. Within 48 hours of the party, the digital clip of my father striking me across the face was playing on thousands of smartphone screens across the county. His damage control was swift, expensive, and characteristically vicious. He hired a boutique crisis management firm to release a highly polished, deeply sympathetic statement to the local press. In it, he painted himself as the exhausted, heartbroken patriarch dealing with an unstable, deeply troubled daughter who had recently gone off her medication. He publicly called me ungrateful. He claimed he was merely trying to physically snap me out of a severe, threatening manic episode in front of his terrified guests. The country club elite swallowed his fabricated narrative whole, sending him expensive gift baskets and prayers, while I instantly became the neighborhood pariah. The next morning, a disgruntled courier slammed a thick manila envelope against the door of my temporary corporate apartment. It was a formal cease and desist letter drafted by a bottom tier, aggressive strip mall law firm Gordon kept on retainer for bullying local contractors. The paperwork demanded the immediate return of allegedly stolen family property, specifically referring to the financial documents I had taken, and formally threatened a massive defamation lawsuit for the leaked video. It was a classic intimidation tactic, incredibly heavy on aggressive legal threats, but entirely devoid of actual teeth. But his real attack was completely silent. As I tossed the legal threat onto the kitchen counter, my burner phone chimed with a high-pitched, automated alert from my credit monitoring application. Someone had just attempted to originate a new, unsecured commercial loan for $100,000 using my Social Security number. The application was immediately denied. My frantic decision to initiate a hard credit freeze less than 2 days prior had been the only shield standing between me and utter, inescapable financial ruin. He was officially desperate, attempting to forge his way to a lifeline before the walls completely caved in. I was pouring a cup of stale, lukewarm hotel coffee when a completely unfamiliar number flashed on my screen. It was not a standard text message, but an encrypted communication via a secure messaging application. I opened it, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The message was brief and chilling. "He is moving money tonight. If you wait, it will be gone." The sender was Kendra, my father's current wife. She was 32 years old, a former interior designer who had always treated me with polite, frosty indifference since the day she moved into the estate. She did not follow up the encrypted message with a plea for mercy or an emotional apology for my bruised face. Kendra was entirely transactional, a survivor navigating a sinking ship. A minute later, a high-resolution image loaded on my screen. It was a stealthy photograph taken of Gordon's open laptop sitting on his mahogany desk. On the illuminated screen was a drafted email addressed to his lead corporate accountant, furiously demanding they push a massive offshore wire transfer before the banking institutions opened the following morning. He knew a legal freeze was imminent. I grabbed my coat and sprinted to Marion's downtown office. I threw the prepaid phone onto her pristine glass desk, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. I paced the floor, telling her it could be an elaborate setup, a carefully orchestrated trap designed by Gordon and Kendra to make us file false information and permanently ruin our credibility before the judge. Marion simply adjusted her reading glasses and studied the illuminated phone screen with absolute, chilling calm. "We verify," she stated flatly, her voice slicing cleanly through my rising panic. "We do not trust." She immediately cross-referenced the email timestamps and the partial routing numbers visible in Kendra's photograph with the comprehensive trust documents Caleb had provided from the bank. The offshore holding company listed in the frantic email perfectly matched a dormant, shell subsidiary of Crestline Development Group. Kendra was not lying to me. Gordon was trying to drain the vault completely dry before we could change the locks. Marion moved with the terrifying, lethal speed of a seasoned apex predator. She immediately drafted a supplemental emergency motion, attaching the credit alert denial and the photographic evidence of the imminent wire transfer. We did not wait for a scheduled hearing on the court docket. Marion filed for an ex parte order, leveraging a powerful legal mechanism that allowed a judge to intervene immediately without Gordon or his cheap lawyers even being present in the room to defend themselves. If the judge signed the paperwork, every single financial account bearing Gordon's name, both personal and fiduciary, would be completely paralyzed by midnight. I returned to my temporary apartment just as the sun was dipping below the horizon, casting long, dark shadows across the concrete parking lot. Sitting on the cold steps of the complex, shivering violently in a thin silk trench coat, was Blair. Her heavy designer mascara was completely smeared down her cheeks, and the perfectly curated, untouchable facade she wore like armor had entirely shattered. She sprang up when I approached, grabbing my arm with cold, trembling hands. She was crying hysterically, begging me to stop the legal proceedings. She sobbed that Gordon's massive credit lines were suddenly freezing up, that the luxury contractors for her new condominium were threatening to walk off the job, and that she was absolutely terrified of losing everything she had ever known. I looked at my younger sister, feeling a profound, heavy sadness in my chest, but absolutely zero pity. For the first time in my life, I did not feel the crushing urge to fix her problems or absorb her pain. I gently but firmly pulled my arm out of her frantic grasp. "Then learn to stand on your own," I told her, my voice unwavering and completely clear. I walked past her, unlocked my apartment door, and closed it firmly behind me, securing the heavy metal deadbolt with a solid, satisfying click. I leaned against the heavy wooden door, the thick silence of the empty apartment washing over me. The amber glow of the streetlights filtered through the cheap plastic blinds. At exactly 9 o'clock, my phone screen lit up one final time in the dark room. It was a direct text message from Gordon. He had finally dropped the public relations mask. There were no more fake apologies, no more PR statements, and no more feigned fatherly concerns. It was a raw, unvarnished ultimatum. "Come home. Sign it, or I will bury you." The fluorescent lights in Marion's office hummed a low, steady pitch. It was early morning, the air in the room thick with a heavy, electric anticipation. Marion sat across from me, a sleek digital audio recorder resting exactly in the center of her glass desk. Ohio, she explained calmly, was a one-party consent state, as long as one person in a conversation explicitly agreed to being recorded. The audio was perfectly legal and admissible in court. She needed me to do the single most dangerous thing I had done since leaving the estate. I had to call him. I had to let him think he was still the apex predator in the room, completely unaware that he was walking straight into a cage. My fingers hovered over the cracked screen of my prepaid burner phone. I pressed his contact name and hit the speaker icon. The line rang twice, the hollow electronic sound echoing loudly against the dark, wood-paneled walls. When he answered, there was no greeting. There was only a sharp, heavy exhale of pure, unadulterated irritation. He demanded to know exactly where I was hiding and what time I was bringing the signed corporate documents back to his mahogany desk. I looked at Marion. She gave me a single, slow nod. Her eyes locked onto the spinning red light of the digital recorder. I kept my voice entirely flat, meticulously stripping away every single ounce of fear or emotion. "If I sign," I asked quietly, letting the question hang in the air, "do I get what Mom left me?" The silence on the other end of the line stretched tight, like a rubber band about to snap. Then, the arrogant, booming voice of Gordon Campbell filled the quiet office, completely unfiltered and entirely damning. "You get what I decide you deserve," he snapped, his words dripping with absolute, terrifying contempt. "I handled the trust myself because you clearly cannot be trusted with money. You are weak. Harper, just sign the damn guarantee so we can be done with this childish rebellion and move on." He hung up. The harsh click signaled the abrupt end of the call. Marion reached forward and stopped the recording. She did not smile, but her eyes gleamed with the cold, predatory satisfaction of a steel trap snapping perfectly shut. She immediately exported the audio file, generating a secure, time-stamped digital log. She combined the pristine audio recording with the printed screenshot of his midnight text message threatening to bury me. It was no longer a disconnected, messy series of family arguments. It was a pristine, legally undeniable mosaic of financial coercion, psychological manipulation, and criminal extortion. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, a county civil judge reviewed our ex parte emergency motion in a closed chamber, faced with a forged legal signature, certified medical documentation of physical assault, and an undisputed audio recording of a fiduciary trustee explicitly holding inherited assets hostage. The court did not hesitate for a single second. The judge issued a sweeping, immediate temporary restraining order. Caleb Trent received the judicial mandate directly at his desk at the institutional bank. Within minutes, every single outward transfer channel tied to the Evelyn Campbell Trust was entirely paralyzed. The only funds legally permitted to move were a strictly designated monthly allowance deposited into my personal account for basic living expenses. The massive steel vault was officially sealed, but Gordon was a creature of absolute, ruthless desperation. The moment his bank cards declined and he realized the trust accounts were frozen, he attempted a frantic, backdoor loophole. He instructed his commercial real estate brokers to execute an immediate, below-market fire sale on a massive industrial warehouse currently held under the Crestline Development Group portfolio. He desperately needed millions in liquid cash to keep his new investors from panicking and pulling out of the upcoming project. However, Marion had already anticipated the pivot. She had meticulously traced the initial purchase capital for that specific warehouse straight back to a massive, unauthorized wire transfer stolen from my mother's estate 3 years prior. Marion instantly filed an emergency notice of lis pendens on the county property record, legally creating a clouded title the moment the brokers pulled the deed. The red flags appeared. No legitimate commercial buyer or title insurance company on earth would touch the warehouse. The multi-million-dollar asset was dead in the water. Trapped in legal purgatory, the hits kept coming with surgical, devastating precision to prevent any further hemorrhaging of the contested corporate assets. The court appointed an independent, third-party professional to act as a temporary special fiduciary. This man was a seasoned corporate liquidator, completely immune to Gordon's legendary charm. He walked directly into the Crestline Development Group corporate office downtown, flanked by 2 private security contractors, and legally stripped Gordon of his executive signing authority. My father could not approve a basic payroll check, let alone transfer millions of dollars offshore. He was effectively locked out of his own hollow, fraudulent empire. Panic finally set in, cornered financially and bleeding credibility by the hour. Gordon sought refuge in the only place he still believed he held absolute, unquestioned power. He called an emergency meeting of the Campbell Family Foundation Board of Directors. He stood at the head of the polished boardroom table, wearing his best tailored suit, attempting to violently spin the narrative. He painted me as a hysterical, greedy child suffering a mental breakdown, trying to destroy the beautiful family charity out of pure spite. He expected their blind loyalty. He expected them to rally behind their generous, flawless patron. Instead, the board chairman, a conservative retired judge, simply slid a tablet across the polished mahogany table. Playing silently on the illuminated screen was the leaked, viral video of the birthday gala. The board was not concerned with internal family drama, but they were absolutely terrified of public relations poison drying up their donor base. The chairman politely but firmly requested that Gordon step down from all foundation duties, surrender his chairman title, and completely distance himself from the charity indefinitely until the unfortunate domestic scandal was entirely resolved. In less than 48 hours, my father had lost his stolen money, his corporate power, and his pristine, carefully curated public reputation. Back in the quiet sanctuary of the law office, Marion was neatly organizing thick stacks of evidence into heavily tabbed trial binders. The final, formal court hearing was officially set for the following morning. I sat on the leather sofa, watching her perfectly manicured hands align the edges of the forged loan addendum. I felt a strange, profound quietness settle deep inside my chest. The suffocating fear that had defined my entire existence was completely gone, entirely replaced by a cold, unbreakable resolve. Marion closed the final heavy binder, the loud snap echoing in the room. She leaned across the glass desk, her eyes locking onto mine, and her voice dropped to a low, conspiratorial whisper. "He is going to walk into that courtroom tomorrow morning entirely convinced that this battle is about a slap," she said, tapping her index finger firmly against the towering mountain of legal documents. "It is not. It is about a paper trail." The night before the emergency hearing, the silence in my temporary apartment was deafening. I lay flat on my back on the stiff mattress, watching the glowing red numbers of the digital clock shift from 2 in the morning to 3, then to 4. I was completely exhausted, my eyes burning from staring at financial spreadsheets for days, yet sleep remained entirely out of reach. For the first time in 29 years, the paralyzing anxiety keeping me awake was not the fear of my father's booming voice or his heavy hand. I was not afraid of his wrath anymore. I was utterly terrified of my own ingrained weakness. I was terrified that when I walked into that courtroom and saw the man who had dictated my entire existence looking small or vulnerable, the decades of deep psychological conditioning would violently pull me under. I feared that the obedient, deeply bruised daughter inside me would suddenly rise up, apologize, and surrender the sword just before the final strike. But that fear evaporated the moment I walked into Marion's downtown office just as the sun began to rise. The sleek glass conference table was entirely consumed by towering, meticulously organized legal binders. Marion was standing over them, dressed in a sharp navy suit, adjusting dozens of brightly colored plastic tabs. Blue tabs for the forged signatures, yellow tabs for the unauthorized offshore wire transfers, red tabs for the sworn medical affidavits. There was absolutely no emotional flair to the presentation. The evidence was aggressively, suffocatingly boring in the purest legal sense. It was just endless pages of routing numbers, timestamps, and dry compliance statutes. But as Marion ran her hand over the cold, hard binders, I understood her lethal strategy. In a court of equity, theatrical screaming matches do not win. Boring, irrefutable paper trails kill. We were finalizing the exhibit list when Marion's desk phone rang. It was Caleb Trent calling from the institutional bank. His voice was incredibly tight, completely stripped of his usual calm demeanor. While executing the final, court-mandated sweep of the trust's peripheral accounts, the bank's automated compliance system had flagged a dormant, highly restricted asset entirely separate from the main financial vault. It was a physical safe deposit box, held deep in the underground vault of the downtown branch. It was registered exclusively under Evelyn Campbell, and the strict, unyielding banking mandate explicitly stated that the box could only be legally accessed with the direct, in-person, physical signature of the primary beneficiary, me, within 30 minutes. Marion and I were standing in the freezing, hyper-secure subterranean vault of the bank. Caleb handed me a heavy metal key and a leather-bound sign-in ledger. My hand shook slightly as I signed my name, proving my identity to the silent security guard. Caleb slid the long, rectangular metal box out of the reinforced steel wall and carried it to a private, windowless viewing room. He placed it gently on the table and left us completely alone. I inserted the key, turned it, and popped the heavy lid open. Inside, resting on the cold metal bottom, was a single, pristine ivory envelope. It was sealed with a heavy wax stamp. I broke the seal and pulled out a thick, aged piece of parchment. It was titled Letter of Direction, notarized and dated exactly 1 week before my mother passed away. I read her elegant, sloping handwriting, my chest tightening with every single word. Evelyn had not just suspected my father's true nature, she had perfectly predicted his exact playbook. The document legally outlined that if Gordon Campbell ever attempted to leverage the family unit, weaponize guilt, or utilize any form of financial coercion to subjugate my free will, his status as fiduciary was instantly voided. But it was the final paragraph that made the breath completely leave my lungs. My mother had legally designated a successor, a specific individual granted absolute, irrevocable power to step in and strip Gordon of his control the moment he crossed the line. I stared at the name written in bold, unmistakable black ink, and then I slowly looked up across the small table. The designated successor was Marion Voss. Marion met my shocked gaze with absolute, unwavering calm. She did not blink. She simply nodded. She had known my mother well. She had made a solemn, binding promise to a dying woman to stand guard in the shadows for a decade, silently watching the accounts, waiting patiently for the exact moment my father proved exactly who he was. My mother knew Gordon would eventually use the sacred concept of family to suffocate me. She had left me a brilliant, ruthless legal assassin to cut me loose, across the city, entirely oblivious to the absolute slaughter waiting for him. Gordon was making his final, fatal miscalculation. Through local legal channels, Marion had discovered that my father had completely bypassed the high-powered corporate litigators. He believed hiring a massive firm would make him look entirely too guilty. Instead, he had retained a cheap, strip mall defense attorney, a man who dealt in minor traffic violations and standard, fill-in-the-blank divorce forms. Gordon's arrogance was breathtaking. He genuinely believed he could stroll into a court of equity, flash his signature country club smile, and convince a seasoned judge that this was nothing more than a silly emotional misunderstanding between a stressed father and a rebellious daughter. He believed the law would bow to him, just like everyone else in his fabricated kingdom. My burner phone vibrated violently against the metal table of the viewing room. The caller ID flashed Blair's name. I hesitated for only a fraction of a second before answering. She did not scream this time. The spoiled, aggressive entitlement was completely gone, replaced by the small, trembling voice of a terrified child waking up in the dark. "He is pacing the living room, screaming at his lawyer on the phone," Blair whispered, her voice cracking with raw, unfiltered fear. "His credit cards are bouncing at the country club. The contractors are threatening to sue him personally. Harper, if he actually loses tomorrow morning. What happens to us? What am I supposed to do?" I closed my eyes, feeling the heavy, suffocating weight of my sister's lifelong dependency trying to latch onto me one final time. I pictured the dark bruise fading on my cheek. I pictured the meticulously forged signature on the loan documents. I pictured the decade of silent servitude I had endured to keep her world perfectly intact. "You learn what adults learn," I answered, my voice steady, cold, and entirely resolute. I did not wait for her to cry or beg. I ended the call and powered the phone down completely. Tossing it into my bag, Late that night, sitting alone at the small desk in my quiet apartment, I pulled out the cheap spiral notebook I had bought from the pharmacy. The city outside my window was quiet, completely still in the hours just before dawn. I picked up a pen and pressed the tip firmly against the blank, lined paper. The relentless, exhausting countdown was finally over. The board was set. The trap was perfectly laid. I wrote a single, defining sentence in dark blue ink. I do not need his permission to exist. I closed the notebook, stood up, and walked toward the window. I watched the first pale golden rays of the morning sun slowly break over the concrete skyline of the city. I was not walking into a courtroom today. I was walking out of the dark and stepping completely into the light. Exactly 14 days after the burning sting of his hand violently altered the trajectory of my life. I sat in the polished, echoing chambers of the county civil courthouse. Gordon walked through the heavy oak double doors, looking like a grieving king. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, his silver hair impeccably styled, playing the role he was born to play to absolute perfection. When the judge, a stern woman with sharp eyes and zero tolerance for theatrics, asked him to state his position, he immediately launched into his practiced, sickening monologue. He spoke softly, his voice dripping with fabricated heartbreak. He talked endlessly about his pristine family honor, the sacred bond between a father and his children, and the tragic, exhausting burden of dealing with a deeply rebellious, financially unstable daughter who had completely lost her way. He actually managed to squeeze a single, pathetic tear from the corner of his eye for the court stenographer to witness. Marion Voss did not interrupt him. She sat perfectly still next to me, letting him dig his own grave with his expensive golden shovel. When it was finally her turn to speak, she did not attempt to match his emotional volume. She simply stood up, adjusted her tailored navy blazer, and began handing heavily tabbed folders to the court clerk. "Your Honor, we are not here today to debate family dynamics or emotional grievances," Marion stated, her voice slicing through the warm, stuffy air of the courtroom like a surgical blade. "We are here to present a documented, undeniable timeline of fiduciary fraud, physical intimidation, and criminal forgery." Marion did not argue. She simply built a wall of evidence that he could not climb over. She played the viral video of the birthday party assault on a court-provided monitor. The sickening smack of his hand against my face echoed sharply off the wood-paneled walls, instantly wiping the sympathetic look off the face of his cheap defense attorney. She formally submitted the printed screenshots of his midnight threats. Then, she brought up our expert witness. Dr. Lila Marsh was ruthlessly efficient on the stand. She pointed to a high-resolution, magnified image of the trust amendment on the projector screen. She briefly and clinically explained that the signature at the bottom completely lacked my natural fluidity. The pen strokes were highly inconsistent. The physical pressure was entirely wrong, and it was, in her professional expert opinion, a clumsy, deliberate simulation. It was enough to establish a severe, legal suspicion of major forgery. Next came Caleb Trent. The soft-spoken fiduciary banker testified calmly under oath that hundreds of thousands of dollars had been systematically drained from the Evelyn Campbell Trust over the past 3 years. He confirmed that the funds were used repeatedly to bridge massive financial gaps in Crestline Development Group's failing commercial projects. He stated for the official court record that I, the sole primary beneficiary of the estate, had not received a single cent of direct benefit from those massive, unauthorized withdrawals. Finally, Marion submitted my mother's original, notarized letter of direction, proving to the judge that his authority was meant to be immediately stripped the second he utilized coercion against me. Gordon's face turned a violent, mottled shade of crimson. The perfectly manicured mask of the benevolent, patient patriarch was rapidly melting off his face in real time. He was not used to being questioned, let alone being systematically dismantled in a room where he could not buy his way out or control the narrative. As Marion pointed out to the judge that he had absolutely no legal right to touch the principal balance without my explicit, verified consent, his legendary temper finally detonated. He slammed his heavy fist against the defense table, the sharp sound echoing like a gunshot. He pointed a shaking, aggressive finger directly at Marion, completely forgetting where he was. That money was mine to manage. He roared, his voice completely devoid of the gentle fatherly tone he had used just 10 minutes prior. I built this family from nothing. Her mother did not know the first thing about commercial real estate. That money belongs to me. The entire courtroom fell dead silent. Even his own defense attorney physically leaned away from him, staring at the floor. Gordon had just handed the judge the absolute final nail for his own coffin. He had explicitly admitted, on the official, recorded court transcript, that he viewed legally protected fiduciary assets as his own personal property. The judge did not even need to recess to her private chambers to make a decision. She looked down at Gordon with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. She delivered her ruling immediately, completely validating the agonizing 2 weeks I had just survived. She permanently removed Gordon Campbell as the managing trustee, stripping him of all fiduciary powers effective the exact second she struck her heavy wooden gavel. She formally appointed the independent receiver to take total, immediate control of the trust and to initiate a brutal, forensic audit of his Crestline company. She issued a sweeping, airtight freeze on every single asset tied to his name, explicitly forbidding the sale, transfer, or hiding of any suspicious property. Finally, she leaned over the high wooden bench and delivered the fatal blow. She ordered a full, comprehensive financial accounting of the estate to be completed within 30 days. If the independent receiver discovered the exact scope of the missing funds that Caleb had testified about, the judge promised to personally hand the entire file over to the State Financial Investigation Agency for immediate criminal prosecution. In the span of 45 minutes, my father lost absolutely everything that made him who he was. He lost his legal power to sign documents. He lost his absolute access to the money that bought his local influence. He lost his ability to command obedience, and he lost the flawless public image he valued high above his own flesh and blood. All of it was securely locked away forever behind the heavy, undeniable seal of the court. I walked out into the brightly lit marble hallway of the courthouse. Blair was standing near the elevators, clutching her expensive designer purse, her face pale and completely shell-shocked. She had heard the entire ruling through the heavy wooden doors. She looked at me, her mouth opening and closing, but absolutely no words came out. She was waiting for me to comfort her, to fix the shattered pieces of her pampered reality, or to scream at her for taking his side. I did none of those things. I stopped in front of her, feeling lighter than I had ever felt in my entire 29 years of existence. "You can be his daughter," I said, my voice soft, steady, and completely devoid of malice. "I am done being his property." I walked past her, stepped into the waiting elevator, and pressed the button for the ground floor. 3 weeks later, I moved into a new apartment on the 3rd floor of a quiet brick building across town. It did not have marble fireplaces, sweeping staircases, or crystal chandeliers, but it had massive, floor-to-ceiling windows facing the east. On my very first morning there, I woke up early, walked over to the cold glass, and pulled the heavy curtains completely open, letting the bright, golden morning sunlight flood the empty room. People might look at what I did to my father and call it a ruthless, calculated revenge story. But standing there, feeling the quiet warmth on my face and taking a deep, entirely unobstructed breath, I did not call it revenge. I called it air, and it was exactly what I deserved to breathe all along. Thank you so much for listening to my story today, and I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please drop your city or country in the comments below so we can connect and share our thoughts. If you enjoyed this journey, please make sure to subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and show your extra support by hitting the hype button so this story can be heard by even more people who might need it.